So, as far as what LLM languages are, the way that I think about it is that if you are designing an LLM language, it's about, you can think of it, you could think of the grammar for the language as kind of like essentially a very sophisticated template, and you get the LLM's generations to go through this template. So a term that comes to mind often for me is carving nature at its joints, which if you aren't familiar with this expression, it's basically like finding a natural way of breaking something down so that it fits well with whatever it is that you're trying to describe. So LLM languages are kind of a way of doing this for, I think you could do sort of like domain specific ones. So it's kind of like carving out your domain at its joints more than anything. But the idea behind ConceptScript is more like carving out latent space at its joints. A lot of its design comes from, it's kind of like mapping to the way that features are structured within the model to a certain extent. And I guess the other part of it has to do with it being a natural meeting point for human thinking and LLM processing, is that concepts are sort of the primary basic unit of thought. And one other thing I'll show that's kind of like how I think about a lot of what's happening when using ConceptScript is it's basically like the linguistic analog to what's happening here. You start with some kind of sketch, which could be, you know, like this tweet that I was describing, and then you just, once you've taught the LLM ConceptScript, then you say, can you represent X as a concept, and it moves it from here to here. And it does that through essentially working out the details, is what it comes down to. So that's probably all I'm going to say for the introduction. And I'll give, so this file here, which I'm going to be sharing, I'll put up a GitHub repo, and you can access it from there and then do the same thing I'm about to show you. And this is a prompt. I call it a spec sometimes, but it's a prompt at the end of the day. It starts with a grammar for the language, and the top level concept or top level structure in ConceptScript is a concept, and then we have some parameters. The context block it's basically a method of allowing it to, well, where it came from anyway. Actually, the type section more fills this role now, is like allowing the model to define a custom language to express the concept in before it actually does the expression. And then we have structures, and these are basically like a combination between like an object from an object-oriented programming language and a function. They can take parameters, they can do extension, they can extend other structures. They have a number of fields, functions, predicates, axioms, and so on. And you can also express constraints on the structure itself. And then you can make a number of assertions. Then, and I'm saying you here, but it's the model that's going to do this. Like I have never, humans do not write ConceptScript or LLM languages. And then, yeah, part of this like linguistic definition is notation. And these transformers are used in the context of proofs. They're basically just to simplify proof steps. And the proofs have kind of an interesting role. They kind of, like, sometimes the content that they have that's included in them is pretty interesting in itself, but how I was thinking about it originally, and I still haven't like fully verified the extent to which this is true, but it plays a role that's similar to chain of thought, where there's this kind of reasoning process, but I think it's a little bit different because it has, the proofs are expressed in terms of the like custom language and structures defined up above. So in order to pull this off effectively, there has to be some and for the proofs to be coherent, and it puts some requirements on the definition of the language and structures, like so that they're defined in such a way that coherent proofs can be expressed. But it can also be used to impose desired properties on whatever concept's being generated. So as an example, if you're having it generate an algorithm, you might request that it include a theorem about desirable complexity properties. And then finally we have an examples block, which is basically just, that's what it sounds like, a concrete instantiation of whatever the concept was. And then most of the rest of the prompt is just example concepts. So we have the simply typed lambda calculus, and so we have here the types that are defined, custom notation. There's two structures, typing, semantics. We have a set of transformers, and then we have the Church-Rosser theorem, one for type safety, and then the SKI is an example. Shape space, this is a paper that I distilled recently. And then we have the last one is the attention mechanism. And then at the bottom here, it's just kind of explaining what it is and the procedure that I generally follow while using it. It's like, I'm going to teach you the language, I'll ask you to express things as concepts, output a code block, and then I usually have it start out by just combining the example concepts into something, so I can just see what sort of comes out from that. So I have all of that exactly pasted in here, and so let's give it a shot. Dependently typed attention, interesting. While it's doing this, I'm going to review the sort of table of contents real quick. Okay. Actually, I'm going to start putting this request in. Grab some water real quick. It's a long one. But yeah, so how coherent this actually is, I think there's a good chance that there's a lot of solid ideas in it. But I am still at a point with this where I'm not like super. I still need to do more verification. I haven't taken some like, when it seems like it's inventing some like really cool deep thing like dependently typed attention. I haven't taken one of those yet to the point of like trying to build a concrete implementation, but we can get some sense just by asking ChatGPT real quick. Yeah, so I don't know. I'd have to spend some more time going through this because usually when I first put something in here, it's like it starts attaching to the language itself. So then I have to explain what ConceptScript is and be like, I don't care about the language. I'm talking about what the language is talking about. So let's just move on for now. Okay, so interesting. So yeah, part of what I wanted to show with this Apple example is just that there's a lot of variation. Like if you have a concept like Apple, there isn't just one way to represent it. There's all these different like angles you could take on it. So now I'm going to ask yeah, I want like a biological perspective on it. So that's a hint that I find myself very often using. Set up the last, and actually I'm kind of taking longer here than what I was planning, so I'm probably going to leave off the Apple example from here rather than doing the taxonomic angle, but that's something I tried in the past, and you can try it out yourself if you're curious. And actually I'm going to reverse the order on this one. Oop, I accidentally spilled water on my keyboard. Okay, so let's Okay, so it has selected the name Emotionally Adaptive AI. This is a wrong. It's been a long time since I wrote this, so I don't remember all exactly what my motivations were here, what the ideas are, but yeah. So returning back to the comment I made at the beginning, we're doing this kind of thing. And if I was actually in the headspace of working on this problem, then at this point it's like, okay, so that's one way of representing it, interesting, and we can sort of see how the different pieces work together, but it's also probably not going to get it fully right the first time, so there would be an iterative process here, and you'd see the points where the representation it selected deviated from what you had in mind, and you could just request these high-level changes. Which reminds me of another thing that I wanted to bring up, which is basically like, I guess, there's a common problem that I've noticed when people are getting bad results with like trying to generate like programs with LLMs, for instance. And even if it's not programs, it could just be anything, but it's basically like if you're starting from something very abstract, and then there's some path that through latent space you're going to take to have the final like fully concrete representation, which could be like a Python program or something like that. But there's just too much sort of like possible variation in how the LLM moves from the abstract concept to the specific representation. So if you operate, if this is the bottom here, this is the top, and if you operate at an intermediate level, which I think a lot of these concepts that you would express is, it ends up, being a good general mechanism for having more control over your generations, basically. So in the context of authoring code, you might start by working on the concept for your program, and you could sort of evolve through conversation the conceptual structure of the program, and then from there you translate the concept scripts into Python or whatever your language is. And I have experimented with this, and it works well. And there are parts of this though, where like I'm saying LLM language rather than like this even specific version of ConceptScript. Like, I don't know if you notice the version number up here, but this is, v28. And there have been a lot of variations. If I were actually to go and use this specifically for authoring code, like I would not include examples. I would probably, if I included proofs at all, I would probably shift it so that the extent to which they're emphasized in the output is much lower. But yeah, so I don't know, I think that's a good general principle. So let's distill this MatMul-free paper real quick. I think it was, yeah. And when doing the paper distillation, it's also not quite as straightforward. It's not as like direct, simple, automatic as just being like, you could set up a prompt so that it would be, but it's not as, you'd have to put a little bit of thought into the prompt, is I guess what I'm trying to say. It's not just like turn this into a concept and then you're going to get exactly the right thing. And I haven't actually done this too much, but like something that I've noticed, and I think it has to do with Anthropic's system for actually like extracting data from attachments like this, is if you do a second iteration, just letting it, generate the first one, then it's like it has a bunch of stuff in context already. So when you tell it, this is a good start, but let's do another iteration and try to, capture more detail from the paper, then it'll typically work very well. Like it'll come back with something much richer, and after, often by the second iteration, you actually have a nice model of the paper there. And I'll show you something else that's kind of cool, which is, in line with this idea of trying to get at that there's a lot of variation in like modeling directions open. One thing that I often do is ask it to take a pedagogical angle in representing the concept, and that could come in the form of like how it structures things, but it could also just be a hint to include some comments through it. So let's try to do that here. Okay, so we're getting some comments here, and it's, sometimes you just have to mess with this a little bit. Like I can already tell that I would, if I were actually like working on this right now, that this would not be my final iteration, and what I probably should have done is just left it open instead of specifying the thing about line comments. Oftentimes it will, I guess I could try that real quick. I don't know how to check the running time, how long I've been, let's see, yeah, okay. But yeah, so you can, I'm trying to think if I want to. I think what I'll do is I'll leave it here for the video, but in the repo I'll include an example that's like a better demonstration of how you can do this like pedagogical version that has nice, teaching material in the expression. And yeah, so once you have this distilled, it's like, if you just want to explore, if you want to use the concepts behind the paper itself, this is essentially a distillation of them that is much more optimal in terms of like ideas per token. It's kind of like fluff removal if all you want is the like logical structure. So I can see and I will probably be building tooling around this, that there would be a lot of utility could come out of building sort of personal libraries of these distilled concepts for, you know, research papers or maybe your notes or whatever. And depending on what you're doing, you might want to inject it into context. And it's like, you know, maybe you're wanting to have some conversation about possibilities opened by some piece of research. So so then, yeah, it's a convenient means of just like loading into context detailed information about something you want the model to know about. Yeah, Meniere's disease. This is another example of doing just a theoretical exploration task. So this Meniere's disease was something that was brought up to me by a friend of mine. She mentioned it specifically after I told her about the system because the underlying mechanisms are hypothesized, but there's still uncertainty, and the existing treatment options for it are not good. So I basically began by saying, like, let's express a concept for our current understanding of Meniere's disease, and then would move into a, like, let's see what kind of reanalysis we can do from physiological principles and known empirical facts about the disorder. And then from there, it's like, okay, with this updated model we have of how the disease works, what potential novel treatment options does that open up? And then this document was generated by Claude from these concepts that were generated during the exploration. And it's a thing too where, like, my friend, she knows a little bit about this, but when we were trying to go in for verification, it's like a lot of these things she hasn't thought about in a long time, and I still just haven't. I would love to work with domain experts and try to figure out better, like, what the strengths and weaknesses of this approach are, and see just like how legit these results are. But at this point, it's not really known. Like, the coherency is there, but something my friend was pointing out is, like, some of the things seem like it's valid, but it's kind of like homing in on something that in reality is just not that important. So yeah, there's a lot of unknowns there. And then for the last example, I'm going to show, so LatentScript, it's kind of, this is the other LLM language I've been working on more recently that's like, its focus is more on injecting into context like a bunch of rich information in order to perform some kind of analysis. So that's a lot of what this opening part is here, and the motivation for that is, like, I've noticed that there's this thing where models, they know all this stuff that relates to a problem, but there aren't these like latching, if there aren't these like latching points in context, it won't bring in this information. So the design of this language is like, what are general mechanisms for getting it to pull in potentially relevant, like, concrete, detailed information, and then it sort of like seeds the context with that, and then when it performs the analysis, and actually, yeah, it would be better to show the actual example. So this was, I was using LatentScript here because my dad was working on this project to install some French doors he bought, and it was in like a cinder block frame, and he's not really a specialist in this area, but he has like built sheds and built like cabinetry and stuff like that. So what I wanted to, and yeah, so he's telling me that he has this PDF, and it's just like horribly written, and he was kind of like talking about what a pain it was going to be to try to parse it. So I'm like, could probably use the system I've been working on to give you a better translation of those instructions. So we can see what it's pulling in. So this was after I taught Claude LatentScript. This is what it generated for this task. So we have a number of concepts, tailoring instructions to experience level, streamlining instructions for concise clarity, theories, cognitive load management, and procedure writing. See, so this is, you can see the kinds of things, like it knows all of this stuff, but ordinarily it would not take it into account before performing some task. So yeah, related domains, technical communication, best practices, human factors of instruction following, and so on. Connecting pinch points. Oh yeah, so the pinch points, this came from, if you saw the illustrations I was doing a little while back about like the quilt pinching of latent space. In that context, it was in the formation of analogies or structural correspondences. But that's kind of the idea here. It's like each of these is like pinching some specific sharp point in latent space. And then the reason I use the quilt metaphor is because it has, when you grab this point, it's like it has these attenuated associations from the point that get pulled into context as well. And then, so this is where we get into the area of where I'm, still doing experimentation. What I'm asking it to do at this point is to take each of these pinch points and express how it connects to whatever the task is. So then we get a list of those, and then we have it generate a set of questions. So what are the most novel and critical steps in the PDF for Dad to internalize? How might we condense PDF content for concise reference without losing clarity? What terminology in the PDF needs further definition or imagery? And then see, there's still tricky things like this where it's like there's a lot of utility can come out of teaching the model more context on what it's doing. It's like, you are a language model. You do not have the capability of generating imagery. Although actually, in this case, I think I did tell it, I gave it some background on that and was like, you can generate ASCII art. It's probably not going to work that well, but you can do that. What background info can prime and scaffold PDF comprehension based on Dad's prior knowledge? And see, it's like, it's coherent, and it's just far richer than the kinds of things that are going to be brought to bear in doing some kind of generation without this. And then, we have these specific conjectures. Silpan construction details may be most valuable PDF augmentation given Dad's experience. And invoking PDF analogies to familiar tasks like shedding rain with shingle layering aids knowledge transfer. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. And yeah, my dad liked it. He actually ended up bringing in a family friend who's a contractor before the instructions were even handed off, so they were not tested in practice, but he read through 2 variations that I generated, and he's like, to the best of my understanding, it seems like coherent, well written, etc. So I am still in the position of wanting more concrete verification, but I think it's quite promising. And yeah, so hold on, let me take a drink real quick. So yeah, I'm gonna put up the repo. It should be up at the same time I post this video. If there's interest, I might put up a Discord also. Like, as far as what I'm trying to do with this at this point, I don't really know. I'm enjoying exploring the design space, and I think there's a lot of potential here. I think it's going to have a lot of longevity too, and I have reasons for that, but I'm kind of wanting to wrap up this video now. So maybe I'll write a little bit on that elsewhere. I want to do a little bit more work on LatentScript and getting that to a more like stable point, but I want very soon to just switch over to start building some kind of system on top of it, because most of what I've been using it for so far is just like in context, or not in context, but you know, using it with like Claude in this like chat context. And I have ideas for a number of systems that I think could do much more interesting sort of generations in an automated fashion, using LatentScript or ConceptScript. Like, you know, one example would be an automated system for doing custom tailored instructional material like this. So yeah, I don't know, if you're interested, I'm happy to talk to people. I just kind of want to explore these ideas, see where it goes, see if some cool project ideas come out of it. So I don't know, hopefully that was useful.